Having just listened to the Gospel of Matthew's version of this morning's passage that we know as the Sermon on the Mount, a group of campesinos in a little colorful country Roman Catholic church in the Solentiname Islands in the middle of Lake Nicaragua gathered in the early 1970s to reflect on that part of this story which begins with the woes that Joan read for us a bit ago. A part of the passage that does not appear in Matthew at all. And whether or not it is coincidence, I suspect most of us are much more familiar with the Matthew version than with the Luke version, which includes the woes we have heard this morning. And yet it is the prophetic tradition of Israel that brings us both these blessings and these woes, which was a common way of the prophets to speak with the people Israel. As Joan read for us, "But woe to you who are rich, for you received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry. Woe to you who are laughing now, for you will mourn and weep." Father Ernesto Cardinal, the priest of this small campesino fellowship, said, "It was curious that the reason these rich people were going to be punished was just because they were rich, because they had already had their joy, not precisely for having been evil rich people." Thomas Pena responds, "Maybe they are evil. They are people who were treating the poor badly. Maybe they don't even want to mention God just because they've got money and you don't have any. And you're always thinking of God, and they were seeing to their things. And they maybe, instead of giving, maybe they take away. That's what they've been doing for some time, and we are abandoned. It seems like it can be that way." Alejandro said, "It is logical that the gospel should put in this counterpart, the woes, because if it only said the Beatitudes for the poor, you might think that there is maybe another kind of Beatitudes for the rich, for certain rich people, or that Christ is with the poor, but he's also with the rich. But St. Luke makes it clear that it's not that way. For Christ, humanity is divided into two well-defined classes, and he is in favor of one and against the other." What do you think of what Ernesto, Tomas, and Alejandro share? Is Luke saying something so simple as there are the poor, which God favors and God will bless, and there are the rich who have had their good times and who will suffer in the future? Maybe you would agree with what Olivia says. She says, "I think that what Jesus is condemning in them is lack of feeling, because you have to have a hard heart to be happy while others are suffering, to be full of food while others are hungry, maybe the very people who work for them." What is so fascinating about our passage this morning is how it is that one receives this word. And how it is that we receive this word is based almost entirely on whether we understand ourselves to be among the poor or among the rich. You can hear these campesinos very quickly jumping to the side of the poor. And if you happen to be one of the poor, the hungry people, then what Jesus is saying sounds like wonderfully good news. But if you happen to be one of the well-fed people, then it sounds on the surface of it as pretty bad news. And notice that the words haven't changed one whit. Only our perspective of what the words mean depending upon where it is that we put ourselves on that spectrum of poor to rich. Now, I think I would be on pretty solid ground if I were to guess that most of us this morning hear this message from the well-fed end of the spectrum. If we're hungry this morning, it's probably because we're on some self-determined diet for Lent or whatever weight loss plan we're on, but it's probably not because we can't get our hands on any food to eat. Certainly by global standards, we are very well off. And so as we listen to the passage this morning, I suspect many of us are liable to find ourselves swimming in wide and deep pools of guilt. But if we see ourselves as helplessly swimming in that deep guilt, I think we're failing to get the full perspective of what this passage is after. For if we passively accept the guilt, then we're missing the point that Jesus is trying to make. First off, the Beatitudes and what I'm going to call the woeitudes are not some wise advice for how it is that we should live our lives. Now, Jesus does give wise advice, and he does it in this very passage. And it's very clear that that's what it is, advice. He says, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. This is clearly advice, and it's clearly offered to everyone, rich and poor alike. But the Beatitudes and the woe-attitudes are not telling us what to do. They're not giving us advice. They're simply describing the way that things are. And Jesus expects that we will find ourselves on that continuum of poor to rich and recognize that that lack of or that abundance of is going to lead us in certain directions and to experience things in certain ways. In many societies, including our own, we use the metaphor, the image of a ladder to talk about our society and the possibility of climbing the ladder of social and economic success, believing that there is opportunity in our land and that everyone has the opportunity to climb up that ladder. But what Jesus is getting at in his teaching here is that there is something much bigger than that on the horizon. It's bigger than the change that Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump are promising. It is true prophetic challenge that Jesus offers, that he describes a reality that's coming into being where the poor will be lifted up out of the dregs that they are experiencing, and that the rich will be taken down from their lofty perch, and that this doesn't have to do with faithfulness. This doesn't have to do with how well we have lived morally. This is just the way life goes. Many of us who find ourselves on the rich end of the spectrum know that there have been times when our wealth and our monetary security have not protected us from loss or ill health or some of the worst challenges that life can throw at us. So we will be knocked down a rung or two or many. What this passage doesn't say outright, but what we know when we think and reflect upon it, is that surely as we go up that ladder of success and wealth, surely we will experience greater sense of wellness and of thankfulness. We will learn what it means to grow in spirit. But what this is also implying for us, if we will pick it up, is that those times when we, at the upper end of the ladder, find ourselves going down rungs, that in that going down experience and in our reflection of it, we have some of the finest opportunities our lives will ever offer for us to grow in spirit. for us to recognize our relationship to the communities in which we live, for us to recognize our relationship to God and our need for God. I believe the Apostle Paul puts this as well as anybody I've ever heard. He wrote many years before our passage in Luke to the church in Philippi, and he put it this way. He said, "For I have learned to be content with whatever I have. I know what it is like to have little, and I know what it is like to have plenty. In any and all circumstances, I have learned the secret of being well fed and of going hungry, of having plenty and of being in need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me." But secondly, we are not trapped in our portion of the ladder of wealth and economic status. While the power of our flesh will, we've all experienced this, will greatly resist at our first tendencies to give to those in need, to share with brothers and sisters who could benefit from the excess resources we have at our disposal, the experience of sharing, what it feels like to tangibly help another, is so rewarding that as we experience that, we will just naturally echo Jesus' teaching that it is more blessed to give than receive, because we feel that that is the case. Thirdly, we might look on this as a matter of justice, that God wills for all of God's children food enough and security enough for the living and the celebrating of our days. And we who have been born in a country that is so rich with opportunity are expected to share of our abundance with those who have not had the same opportunities we have had, but who have the very same needs that we do have. An economist, Carl Weinberg, reflects on the most recent economic changes in our world, that dramatic drop in the price of oil, and calls our attention to a fact. He says, "The harm to people in low-income oil-producing countries from low crude oil prices is disproportionate to the gains that many Americans are experiencing." That is what we pay at the gas pump. If you take $1 away from someone poor in Nigeria, and put it in the pocket of someone richer, say in Connecticut, the loss of income for the poor person hurts much more than the benefit to the rich person. So giving becomes a matter of justice. Fourthly, and one that I think we sometimes hide from, and sometimes I have heard even the words of Jesus turned upon this concern. Jesus says, "The poor you will have with you always." Ripped out of context, can be used to say we don't need to work at helping people get out of poverty. But that's certainly not what Jesus was meaning. Fourthly, the eradicating of poverty, or hunger at least, is within our reach. I don't know if you were able to read the United Nations Millennium Task Force on Hunger report that came out 10 years ago, but they came out with this very powerful and I think hopeful statement. The conclusion of the task force is that the hunger goal can be achieved, and that hunger can be eventually eliminated from the face of the earth. Achieving that goal will require focused and unprecedented levels of effort from all sectors, but it is well within the reach of human capabilities. The world has made progress in reducing hunger, but not quickly or broad enough. As this report goes to press, more than 5.5 million children, remember this is in 2005, 5.5 million children are dying of malnutrition-related causes each year. The actions outlined in this report, taken by a broad coalition of stakeholders and applied in every country, can change that. So if it's possible to eradicate hunger and to radically alleviate poverty, then perhaps our perspective changes. that extreme malnutrition and that destitute poverty that we have sometimes told ourselves is inescapable is really just a recurring series of choices that you make and I make and several billion of our sisters and brothers make that keeps those dark realities with us. Jesus Christ and all of the great religious leaders of our memory point us in one long march towards a transnational human solidarity to the equitable and compassionate sharing of our earthly abundance, so that everyone, and hear that word, everyone, has what they need. Today we can walk and we can sponsor others who walk to raise funds for Church World Service and the ministry that they do in the name of Jesus Christ to alleviate hunger and poverty. In a week and a half, we have an opportunity to give through Amplify Austin and to support the work of Micah 6 as it alleviates poverty and hunger. Everywhere we turn, it seems, there is an opportunity to share of what we have been given. And sometimes it feels a burden upon us. I know it does. But it's an opportunity to give in ways that can change the lives of so many. Do you believe that we can change the world one gift at a time? I not only believe that we can, but I believe that in the Spirit of Jesus Christ, we will. Will you pray with me? Holy One, grant us a vision of the world as you desire it to become when your children gather in celebration and peace and praise your name for the beauty and glory of this earth. And Lord, show us ways in which we can be the instruments of this peace.